Welcome to the Bring Me My Books podcast. I'm Kristi Cain, and normally I'm here with my co-host, Travis Lowe, but Travis is getting ready for the Hopewords Writers Conference, so if you're coming to that, we'll see you soon. But today, I'm talking to my new friend, Kyle Garrett, and Kyle, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then I'll kind of throw in why we wanted to chat with you.
Okay, yeah. So my name is Kyle Garrett, as she said, and I'm an associate professor of English at Emmanuel College, now Emmanuel University. I graduated from the University of Georgia with an English degree, went back for an MFA in creative writing at UGA, and I've been teaching at Emmanuel University since then in English, and also I teach some Gen Ed Bible classes. I served as an associate pastor at a local church here in Royston for a season as well, and now live in Gainesville with my wife and our daughter Bella, who's 9 years old. And so that's kind of a brief history of me.
Okay, that's awesome. Well, when we were thinking about Bring Me My Books, and usually we spend a lot of time working our way through a specific book, but we also just love reading. We think it's important to be readers and to continue reading past our educational years, or I guess I'll say our formal educational years. Hopefully we're always learning. And so when we were thinking about doing a few extra episodes, I thought, let's talk to someone whose business, whose very life really kind of revolves around books. And so one of the first questions I have for you is, as Christians are reading, is there a Christian way to read? Do you talk about that with your students? I'm sure you think about it.
Well, I think it's actually more of a conversation that I have with faculty members on campus. And I guess that gets communicated more implicitly to the students sometimes. But it is an interesting question, because as Christians, obviously, the Bible is that central text for us that we're constantly reading, right? It's more than just a text. It's not even a textbook, right? It's way more than that. And that's one of the issues and one of the sort of fights that we have to fight even in those Gen Ed Bible classes, where we assign a Bible as one of the books that they have to take with them and read and that sort of thing, but not letting that book become a textbook to them, letting it be God's love letter to them and letting them have that relationship through that text. And so coming out of that conversation, that idea of I guess, how do we read a text as Christians? I think one of the biggest things that for me I have to keep in mind and think through with other faculty is that idea that His word is the truth, right? The Bible is the truth with a capital T. And so while I'm kind of a unicorn when it comes to English professors, I think in some ways, and maybe when it comes to just my position at a Christian college and the fact that I have 1 foot in each camp in terms of the Gen Ed Bible, and also I teach literature. Okay. So this might not be even what you were expecting.
No, it's great.
But yeah, so for me, I think it's important that we read these texts. Like I brought some texts with me today, some of the texts that I'm reading / texts that we read in my literature classes, but it's in it. I think we can glean truth from these texts. But these texts are not the truth, right? And so, how do we allow these texts that we read help us grow, and yet, to just read and to learn and to know doesn't necessarily mean that you're growing in the process. And so letting something like the truth that we gleaned from these texts be filtered through the actual truth, the real truth in the Bible. And sometimes they parallel each other and sometimes they point, but always pointing it back to, I'm always doing this in my literature classes, how does this reflect back to the Bible? How do we get back to the truth here? And I hope it's not in an inorganic, strange way. I'm not trying to just twist their arm to actually that makes me think of this verse, roll it, right? It's actually way bigger and way deeper than that. So that's constantly a question that I'm thinking about and talking about, and a question like, for example, we just read The Catcher in the Rye in my literature class. And so we get to talk about Holden Caulfield. We get to talk about how he's dealing with anxiety and depression. We get to talk about his coping mechanisms and coping strategies and all that kind of stuff, and some of the trauma that he's gone through and how he's reacting to that stuff. And then with reference to that, we get to think about, okay, what does the truth say about how we deal with anxiety? Is Holden handling things maybe the way that Christ would want us to handle them? How could he think differently about the way he's reacting to this situation? So, I don't want the Bible to be tacked on, but it's always kind of in the background. God's word and God's relationship with us is always in the background of these texts that we read. And for my money, that's why I love teaching literature at a Christian college, is that we can do that. If I was just teaching literature somewhere else, it would be hard to do, because that is my reference point, and I don't want to shy away from that. And fortunately, at a place like Emmanuel, I'm encouraged to never shy away from that. So.
Yeah, that is great.
Yeah.
So I think about, we talk a lot about books in this podcast. And even though we are believers, Travis and I both are, we don't talk a lot about what we're reading in Scripture. But you just like the image that I got from what you were saying is almost like you're reading everything alongside the Bible. So how do you help a student who's not ever really thought about maybe all their educational learning and the way they've approached literature has always, let's say, maybe they've never had a Christian teacher.
Yeah.
How do you teach a student to read those things in tandem? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, and in the literature class that I'm thinking of, it's a Gen Ed 208 literature class everyone has to take. There are students who maybe have never done that, have never read the Bible, or especially they transferred in, they haven't had those Gen Ed Bibles yet, that sort of thing. So, I don't have time, obviously, in that class to go through a Bible primer. This is the story of the Bible. Right. And I just jump right in. And I think the biggest thing is treating the text empathetically, treating the characters empathetically. And in those moments where, something is jumping out at me as I'm reading this text about his personal identity and the way that he's seeing himself, I can relate that back to our identity in Christ and how we see ourselves, again, not in an inorganic way, but in an organic way that comes right out of the chapter. Then I'm not going to spend a 50-minute lecture in class talking about our identity in Christ, but I am going to take 2 or 3 minutes here or there about this topic and talk through, hey, let's look at what this means for us as Christians, or for if Holden was a Christian, or that sort of thing. And it's been really rewarding. Even this semester, just yesterday, we had a baptism service at chapel yesterday at Emmanuel, and there were 2 students out of the 5 that got baptized that were in this literature class. And I don't, one of them especially, I think, had nothing to do with that. Yeah. One of them, I don't know, maybe it had a little bit to do with that. And we had talked a lot after class. And so I like to think that God is using that class and me through that class to help get to this student. And I know that student has had Bible classes. Yeah. And so it's just cool seeing how God uses all of us in different ways to help reach people.
Yeah. I think that's great. Okay, my next question, because I think sometimes Christians are like, should I just read Christian books? Almost kind of like that question. When I was growing up, there was a period of time where I thought I should only listen to Christian music. And I don't feel that way now. Yeah. But I'd love to hear from you as someone who loves literature. Yeah. What kind of books should Christians be reading?
This is such a tough one, right? I think I've been through seasons in my life where I've felt both ways. I felt like I'm just going to bury my nose in the Bible, and I'm going to hope that God is growing me spiritually in this place like this right now. And there's been other times where, kind of read everything under the sun. Whatever somebody puts in my hands or whatever looks appealing at the library, I'm like, I'll check that out. Yeah. And so I think I don't think there's a one way necessarily. I think as long as we are reading them all through the lens of Scripture, Scripture's in the background, and you're not letting a book become a bigger truth to you than the truth. Yeah. I think it's fair game. And so again, that's what kind of we do in these literature classes is sort of shine a light on these books through the lens of the light. And it allows students, I think, sometimes to relate to these books, and even readers and book clubs and things like that to relate to characters in these books in a way that they wouldn't necessarily as readily relate to a character, say, in the Bible, in the biblical text, in the biblical story. They're getting, first person inside the head of somebody in this book for 300 pages. You can't help but learn to think how they think for a minute, or relate to it and empathize with it. And so, again, but if we let that truth become bigger than the biblical truth, then we're losing the point, I think, as Christians, in terms of how we can read text and let these texts come alive to us. And I think that's important.
Situated in Bluefield, West Virginia, the Hopewards Writers Conference seeks to equip and encourage their patrons to tell stories of hope. This year's conference will focus on the question of living between cultures and the unique potential it holds for creativity. The conference will offer many exciting guest author speakers this year, and can't wait to learn what God has been speaking into their lives. Come with us and help us tell stories of hope. LifeSprings Resources is committed to providing innovative learning resources for the local church. Our products reflect our commitment to the development of new and innovative ways to experience scriptural truth. Whether you're looking for material for your small group, need new curriculum for Sunday school, or you're just trying to stock up on church supplies, we've got you covered. Look for us online at lifespringsresources.com or call us at 1-800-541-1376, and our friendly customer service team will be happy to assist you.
So obviously you teach literature. You took the time after even 4 years of undergraduate to go back and study literature more. This reading is important to you. We can know. So my big question is, how has reading shaped you? But as we're getting to that, I would love to know, when did you fall in love with reading? What pushed you in that direction?
I think I fell in love with reading when I was in middle school and high school. I just always loved to read, and as I got further into high school, I also seemed to be good at writing. And when I got to college, I was taking English 1102 first semester, and I had a really fantastic English 1102 teacher, and she pulled me aside and said, "Hey, have you thought about an English major?" And I was like, "I haven't thought about any major." She was like, "Well, you really should think about it because I think you do well, blah, blah, blah." And I just put it down for a minute thinking I'll probably change this my junior year, get the core out of the way. But I never did. And at one point I remember thinking if I can get a degree by reading stuff I'd want to read anyway, and then writing about it, which is not that difficult for me. I enjoy the analysis part of it. Sure, you can give me a degree for that. I'll take it. And I had absolutely no plan for the future. I had no idea what I would do. And I remember going home and visiting my grandpa after deciding to be an English major, and he asked me what I had decided, and I said English, and he said, "What are you going to do with that?" I mean, the only thing you can possibly do with that is maybe teach. And I was like, well, I'm definitely not doing that because I am not going to be a teacher.
That's funny.
I was dead set against it for whatever reason. I think I just felt that's not me. I don't know that I have anything to offer in the classroom. And I saw these professors and these teachers as these super knowledgeable people that were just, they were just their own Wikipedia, right? And just storehouses of knowledge. And I felt that's not my style. That's just not me as a person. And then I had some creative writing professors at UGA at the undergrad level, and I thought, these are more my people.
Okay.
They're not these storehouses of knowledge in this encyclopedic way. They are way more, they said, "Hey, call us by our first name." Way less formal and just more relational. And that appealed to me. And now, for me, in my testimony, growing closer to the Lord, especially in grad school, it sort of dovetailed into this like more relational style of teaching that is super conducive to what I'm doing now at a Christian college, which I wouldn't want it any other way. So that has been so wonderful, being able to use that part of myself and those gifts that even when I didn't think I had anything to offer in the teaching field, God knew, and God was guiding me. I remember after undergraduate, classes ended and I graduated and I went and worked a job in Atlanta for about a year. And I remember thinking, God, I don't want to do this job for the rest of my life. I was working as a journalist for a magazine, writing columns and things, but it was in a cubicle. It was boring. And I remember praying to God and saying, like, Lord, I feel like I want to go to seminary, but I also feel drawn to creative writing. And that was one of the first times I felt like God kind of spoke to me clearly, and I felt like he was saying, if you go to seminary right now, it is going to completely break whatever little faith you have in me right now. And I think,
which it does sometimes.
Yes. I'm not saying every single one of them would have been that way, but I guess wherever I would have potentially wound up, it would have done that. So I went the creative writing route. And it's so funny the way God kind of brought it back around, where now I'm teaching Gen Ed Bibles, but also teaching literature. So okay,
that's great. So share some of the books that have impacted your life.
Well, a book that was one of my favorites growing up. The first book that made me laugh out loud was The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. And that one, I mean, I'm sure many of us have read that book. I think one of the parts that always gets me is the ode to Stephen Dowling Bott's. Is this girl that Huck meets, and she keeps a scrapbook of people that after they die and they had the obituaries in the papers, she would cut them out, put them in her scrapbook, and then write poems about them, even though she didn't know them.
I forget this part.
I'll read it to you. Okay. It's very short. And did young Stephen sicken? It's an ode to Stephen Dowling Bott's. And did young Stephen sicken? And did young Stephen die? And did the sad hearts thicken? And did the mourners cry? No, such was not the fate of young Stephen Dowling Bott's. Those sad hearts round him thickened, 'twas not from sickness's shots. No whooping cough did rack his frame, nor measles drear with spots. Not these impaired the sacred name of Stephen Dowling Bott's. Despised love struck not with woe that head of curly knots, nor stomach troubles laid him low, young Stephen Dowling Bott's. Oh no, then list the tearful eye, whilst I his fate do tell. His soul did from this cold world fly by falling down a well. They got him out and emptied him, alas it was too late. His spirit was gone for to sport aloft in the realms of the good and great. And when it hits that part of by falling down a well.
That's the part that got me too. That's awesome.
I remember a professor reading that out loud to us in an American literature class in college. And I was snorting. I was laughing so hard at people. It was like well after the laughter had died down, and I'm still like trying to compose myself. I'm like, is he okay?
Was this like a core class, or were you with your fellow?
I think I was in the major at that point.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's one of the books that made me laugh. I remember the first book that made me cry. It was Where the Red Fern Grows. Oh, yeah. You remember that one? I read that, and I think it was 6th grade, and.
That's why we have a dog.
Really?
Yes.
Wow. That's cool. That book made a mark on a lot of people, right? And, some other books that we're reading in English 102, this is a book that we read in there. It's called The Sunflower on the Possibilities and Limits of Forgiveness, and it's about a Jewish man named Simon Wiesenthal who was instrumental in in hunting down the Nazis after World War II ended, because he himself was in the concentration camps as a Jewish man, and a German officer in the SS had gotten hit by a mine and was on his literal deathbed and in a complete body cast, and he asked one of the nurses to go find a Jewish man and bring him up so I can apologize to the Jewish people. Mm-hmm. He brings up this guy, Simon, and he tells his whole story, and there's this like atrocious, terrible thing the German guy does in the middle, and I won't go all into it, but basically it's just terrible, and it's racking his conscience, and he knows he's about to die, and he feels like he needs to confess to someone that is Jewish. And so he confesses to Simon, and Simon's not really sure what to do, how to respond. He feels like, can I forgive kind of on behalf of my entire race? Right. And so he ends up walking out and not saying anything at the end. And then after that, though, for years, he feels kind of this gnawing guilt about that and wonders, did he make the right decision? Should he have just forgiven this man in his last hour of life? And he opens it up at the end and asks that question. And religious leaders of all different religions and politicians and all kinds of people write in and say what Simon should have done, or if they'd been in his place, what they would have done. So that's one of those where we get to explore the question of forgiveness, the boundaries, if there are any, the limits of forgiveness, and how would even these students respond to an atrocity in their life in that way. Obviously not wishing anything on them, but how would you respond in a place where you need to forgive? And a lot of them are in a place where they've experienced trauma in their life, and how do I deal with this, and what does forgiveness look like? So that's one of the more serious ones coming out of young Stephen Dowling Potts, and a couple of others. This is Fangirl is one that I bring into English 208 as well. It's a relatable text because it's a girl that is in college, and it's her first semester at college, and she's dealing with a lot of anxiety and depression, and very introverted. And the text allows us to think about how she's dealing with things and her own coping mechanisms and how she comes out of that. And it's not in any way Christian. It's very secular, and actually it's one of those where I'm kind of like, ooh, should I assign this text? Sometimes we get to some parts and I'm like, oh man, my students are reading this, and I have to, I kind of prep them, and then I ask them afterwards. I'm like, and if there's anything that you need to skip, just skip it. But I think on the whole, they usually find it very instructive and very helpful to have these conversations through the lens of this book.
In that environment, I feel like that's a good place to have those conversations.
I hope so, One I just read, and I just finished a couple of days ago, is this one by Lisa Gunter, Choir of Angels. She's the founder of the Love Him, Love Them group. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but it's a choir of Haitian children from a Haitian orphanage down in Haiti that she helps out, and then she built a hospital for them and built, I think, a campus for them and other things. And so this book I brought into my my ECF 200 class, the Gospel of John class, because we hit that part in the Gospel of John, chapter 14, I believe it's verse 12 the other day, where Jesus is saying, these things you will do, and greater things you will do. And I kind of stopped class for a minute, and I was like, guys, what does this mean? And we're talking about the miraculous here. We're talking about the supernatural. And why don't we see more of this in our everyday Christian lives? And anyway, long story short, we started talking about things that people had seen in class and miracles that they personally had experienced or knew that their family members had experienced, and even some things that had happened on campus, and got some people on Zoom. And then she even came to our class actually last week. Yeah, she's local. And was able to speak into our class's lives, and it was really powerful. She is a go-getter. She is an awesome woman, and she was in real estate for a long time, and basically she went down to Haiti, and the Haitian guy that was in charge of the orphanage down there said everybody that comes down here says they should take these children to America and tour around America, because it's just so powerful hearing them sing to Christ when they have literally nothing. They don't have running water, they don't have electricity, and yet they are praising God with their whole heart. He said that's what people always say, and she said, well, I'm going to do it. And that's awesome. How it started.
Wow.
And it just went on from there, and there's a lot to it. But so I just finished that. And then here lately, I've been in a lot of conversations with some of the people that are teaching the Gen Ed Bible classes with me. And this is one of the texts that we were kind of passing around, Systematic Theology by Grudem. And it's one of those that a lot of undergrads in Bible will read, and some master's students. You remember that text?
Actually, in grad school, that was one of the texts that we were just required to buy for the whole program.
That's awesome.
Even same author and everything.
Really? Yeah. Okay. So and one of the conversations we've been having is a theological conversation about the new perspective on Paul. I don't know if you're familiar with that conversation necessarily, but so it's kind of a different theory of how Paul views justification and atonement. It's kind of an alternate theory that's really gained traction here in the last 20-ish years through especially the scholarship of N.T. Wright. And so we get to have conversations about that, and I've been digging further into that so that we can make those valuable and robust, and so that's kind of our kind of book club is looking at that right now. That's what we're doing.
Great.
So,
that's really cool. Well, thank you. I'm really grateful that we were able to. I feel like we probably could have talked. I would have loved to have talked actually about some of these books longer, but this is what we have today. And but I appreciate your perspective, sharing about what books have kind of done for you, and just even kind of how God has used your love for books and love for reading to inspire other people to read. Students, teach them how to read alongside the Bible, read Christianly. But yeah, just grateful for that. And thank you. Thanks for tuning in. We're always very grateful for you to be a part of Bring Me My Books or listen in. And we look forward to what we're doing next. We hope that you'll be reading along with us and following our book schedule. And also just having conversations with other people with the people in your life about the books that you're reading.